Market rates changed. Deal with it. Those 5 words came out of Gerald Fletcher's mouth like he was telling me the weather. There was no hesitation, no apology. Just a cold statement, as if 12 years of my hard work and dedication meant absolutely nothing to him or the company. I was standing in the small copy room on the 3rd floor of the Apex Systems building, right next to the high-volume printer and the office supply shelves. The paper in my hand was still warm, fresh from the output tray. It was an official offer letter that had been left there by mistake. I was only trying to grab the quarterly server logs I had printed, but my eyes caught the numbers on the page. $126,000. That was the base salary for someone named Kelly Adams, who was scheduled to start as a junior logistics analyst the following Monday. The letter spelled out her details. She was a fresh college graduate who had finished her degree just 3 months prior, with 0 years of professional experience. I make $90,000. I have made exactly $90,000 for the last 4 years. I had not planned to confront Gerald about it right then. I wanted to process the shock first. But as I stood there staring at the document, Gerald walked past the copy room. He noticed me holding the paper, looked at the printer, and stepped inside. He said that I was looking at things that did not belong to me. I told him the letter was sitting open in the printer tray, and that I had not gone searching for it. When he reached for it, I handed it over. He glanced at the name, then at the salary, and asked if there was a problem. I told him Kelly was starting at $126,000. He told me that was simply the current market rate for the role. I pointed out that I only make $90,000. He shrugged and reminded me that I had been with the company for 12 years, meaning my salary was tied to the bracket from when I first started. He asked me if I expected him to change company policy just because starting salaries had risen. I asked him if he really believed it was fair for a new hire with 0 experience to make nearly 40% more than someone who had been the backbone of the department for more than a decade. Gerald folded the offer letter in half, slid it into his pocket, and uttered those 5 words. Market rates changed. Deal with it. Then he turned around and walked back to his office. I stood in the copy room for about 30 seconds. My hands were steady. My breathing was completely normal, and I did not feel the sudden rush of anger that people usually describe. Instead, I felt an icy, absolute clarity. I had known for a long time that I was underpaid. You do not work at a place like Apex Systems for 12 years without noticing how the industry moves around you. But seeing the exact numbers, the black ink on that warm paper, made the truth undeniable. $36,000 less. That was the gap between my salary and the pay of a person who had not worked a single day in the industry. My name is Harold Vance, and until that afternoon, I was foolish enough to believe that loyalty and hard work actually mattered. Let me explain how I ended up in that copy room. 12 years ago, I was 36 years old. I had joined Apex Systems after a restructuring at my previous employer. The department was much smaller back then, consisting of only 6 people. Gerald was not our supervisor. He was just a peer in my group, about 2 years older than me, and he was struggling. I do not mean he was bad at his job, but he could not handle the workflow. He was constantly overwhelmed by project deadlines and had no idea how to talk to clients. Because I wanted our team to succeed, I helped him. I taught him how to organize his dashboard, how to track client requests, and how to write clear, actionable project scopes. During my 2nd month, Gerald asked me how I managed to keep everything running so smoothly without getting stressed. I told him that I wrote everything down, documenting not just what was requested, but who asked for it and why it was important to them. He began copying my methods, and within a few months his performance improved. Our supervisor at the time was a veteran named Diane Jenkins. She was tough but incredibly fair. She noticed Gerald's improvement and started giving him more responsibility. Whenever Gerald got stuck on a complex logistics model, he came to my desk. I spent hours walking him through the math and the software integrations. He told me at least 50 times during those first 3 years that he owed me everything. When Diane retired, the department head promoted Gerald. He had been there slightly longer than me, and he was much better at presenting himself in front of senior executives. Before the official announcement went out, Gerald took me to lunch and promised me that nothing would change. He said we were a team, and that he would always look out for me. I congratulated him, believing he deserved the chance. But things did change. Slowly, the dynamics shifted. The collaboration became delegation, and his promises of mutual support turned into an endless series of assignments. A year after Gerald Fletcher became our supervisor, the company hired 3 new junior logistics analysts. Gerald came to my desk with their resumes and asked me to take the lead in training them. He told me that I was the best trainer in the building, and he needed someone who could get the new hires up to speed quickly. I agreed without hesitation, showing them everything Diane Jenkins had taught me, along with the custom templates and shortcuts I had created over the years. I spent hours explaining the nuances of the supply chains, how to anticipate delays, and how to communicate effectively with the warehouse supervisors. 3 years after that, one of those new hires, Brenda Henderson, was promoted to a senior role. She had only been with the company for 3 years total, while I had been there for 7 years. She was good at her job, but I had been doing senior-level work for at least 4 years. I went to Gerald's office to ask him about it. I asked him why I had not even been considered for the senior specialist role. He looked up from his computer screen and told me that I was simply too valuable in my current position. He explained that I was the anchor of the department, the person who kept the daily operations stable, and that if he moved me up, the entire team's productivity would suffer. He said that my expertise was irreplaceable at the operational level. I asked him if I was being punished for being reliable. He smiled and said it was not a punishment, but a form of recognition, and that he needed someone he could count on at the core level. I did not push the issue further back then. I should have, but I did not. That same year, I requested a formal salary review. I had been making $70,000 for 5 years, with only minor annual cost of living adjustments that brought me to $78,000. I wrote a detailed memo outlining my contributions, the training programs I had run, and the systems I had optimized. Gerald promised he would present it to his manager, Evelyn Brooks. 2 weeks later, he came to my desk and told me the budget was tight, but he had fought hard for me and secured a 3% raise. That brought me to $80,000. He told me that we would revisit the salary next year, promising that things would be different. Next year came, and the same pattern repeated. I wrote the explanation. Gerald made the promise to fight for me, and he returned with a 2% increase, bringing me to $81,600. He blamed senior management and budget brackets, telling me my performance was excellent and that the small increase did not reflect my true value. A year later, Sean Miller, the second person I had trained, was promoted to a senior specialist role after just 2 years. I later discovered he was earning $105,000. I did not even bother asking Gerald about it. I already knew the empty excuses he would give me, but there was something Gerald did not know. During my first year at Apex Systems, I had developed a proprietary logistics optimization tool called OptiPath. I wrote the code on my own time, using my own personal laptop, completely separate from my daily job duties. The software used a unique algorithm to reduce shipping route delays. It was my intellectual property, and I had registered it with the United States Copyright Office, receiving an official registration certificate. When Gerald became supervisor, he noticed me using the tool to solve complex client issues. He asked me to share the tool with the rest of the department. I agreed to let the team use it. But when Gerald asked me to sign an intellectual property assignment agreement to transfer the rights to Apex Systems, I refused. A year ago, while looking through the company's internal compliance database for an unrelated project, I stumbled upon a digital copy of an intellectual property assignment form for OptiPath. It had my name on it, and at the bottom was a signature that looked like mine, but I knew I had never signed it. Gerald had forged my signature and submitted the document to HR, claiming the software was developed as a department project under his supervision. He had received a massive corporate innovation bonus and a promotion justification based on this forged document. Forging a signature on a legal contract is a direct violation of California Penal Code, Section 470. Instead of panicking, I quietly downloaded the document. I hired a certified forensic document examiner to analyze the signature. The examiner wrote a comprehensive report concluding that the signature was an obvious forgery. I placed that report, my original copyright certificate, and the forged contract in a plain folder inside my desk drawer. I did not act immediately. I wanted to wait until the right moment, hoping I would never have to use it. But when Gerald stood in the copy room and told me to deal with a $36,000 pay gap, I knew the time had come to open that drawer. I knew that I had to defend myself against a system that was happy to take my labor and give the rewards to everyone else. I walked back to my desk after the confrontation in the copy room. My mind was completely clear and my focus was sharp. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, reached past the old notebooks, and pulled out the plain manila folder. I had been adding documents to it for years, almost like a habit. Every time I submitted a formal request for a salary correction, I printed it. Every time Gerald Fletcher sent an email promising that we would address my compensation next quarter, I kept it. I also had copies of every single annual performance review from the past 12 years. I sat down and slowly flipped through the pages. In year 6, Gerald had written that my contributions had directly resulted in our department exceeding its performance targets for 3 consecutive quarters. He described my ability to manage multiple high-priority projects simultaneously as unmatched. In year 7, his review stated that without my expertise and dedication, the department's expansion would have failed, noting that I had trained 3 new team members who were now fully productive. In year 8, he wrote that I consistently delivered exceptional results under tight deadlines and was the most reliable member of the team. In year 9, his written feedback praised my technical leadership, stating that I was the primary reason the company's network operations remained online during the peak season. I read these comments over and over. He had written these glowing reviews. Yet every time I sat across from him asking for a raise, he looked me in the eye and lied. He told me there was no budget, that his hands were tied by corporate constraints, and that I needed to wait until the next cycle. In reality, he was using my outstanding reviews to justify his own bonuses, taking the credit for the department's high performance while actively keeping my salary at the bottom. He promoted Brenda and Sean using metrics and data that I had produced, attributing my successes to them to make himself look like a brilliant manager. I stood up and went to the copy center. I made 3 complete copies of the entire folder. I organized each set chronologically, making sure the presentation was clear and professional. I used color-coded dividers to separate the different types of evidence, ensuring that anyone reading it could grasp the situation in minutes. The first section contained the salary comparison, showing my 12 years of service and $90,000 salary next to the fresh graduates' offer letter of $126,000. The second section contained 12 years of performance reviews and broken promises. The third section contained the hammer: my United States copyright registration for OptiPath, the forged intellectual property assignment agreement, and the certified forensic handwriting analysis report. Under California law, a forged contract is void from the beginning, a legal doctrine known as void ab initio. Because the assignment agreement was forged, Apex Systems had no legal right to use my software. For the past 4 years, the company had been using OptiPath commercially to route thousands of shipments daily, making it the core engine of their logistics service. Without a valid license, their commercial exploitation of my software constituted direct and willful copyright infringement under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code. Under Section 504 of the same title, they were facing statutory damages of up to $150,000 per willful infringement. If I pressed that button, the legal and financial fallout for the company would be catastrophic. I knew that I was holding a folder that could cost the company millions, all because they allowed a manager to run his department like a personal fiefdom. I returned to my desk and opened my email client. I did not schedule a meeting with Gerald. Instead, I sent a meeting request to his manager, Evelyn Brooks, and to the department head, George Albright. George was a senior executive who had been with Apex Systems for over 30 years and was known for his strict adherence to compliance. The subject line of the email read, compensation equity, and intellectual property compliance review. I requested a meeting for 2 o'clock that afternoon, labeling it as time-sensitive. Evelyn accepted the request within 10 minutes, and George accepted shortly after. At noon, Gerald walked over to my desk. His face was tense and he looked uncomfortable. He asked me why I had scheduled a meeting with Evelyn and George without consulting him first. I looked up at him and told him it was a compensation discussion. He told me that going over his head was unprofessional and made him look bad to senior leadership. I reminded him that we had been discussing my compensation for 12 years, and his final answer was that I needed to deal with it. I told him I was simply following his advice and dealing with it through the proper corporate channels. Gerald stood there for a moment, his jaw tight, before telling me that I was making a mistake. Then he turned and walked away, his face flushed with anger. At 2 o'clock, I took my folder and walked up to the executive conference room on the 4th floor. The room was quiet, with a large glass table in the center and windows overlooking the parking lot. Evelyn Brooks was already sitting at the table, reviewing some papers on her tablet. George Albright arrived a minute later, holding a cup of coffee. He greeted me warmly, noting that he had not seen me since the annual department dinner 2 years ago. I thanked both of them for taking the time to meet with me. I placed 2 copies of my folder on the table, sliding one toward Evelyn and one toward George. I told him that I wanted to discuss my compensation and a serious compliance issue regarding the department's logistics software. I explained that I had been with Apex Systems for 12 years, and my current salary was $90,000. I told them that the previous day I had found an offer letter on the printer for a fresh graduate starting at $126,000. I asked them to help me understand how a person with 0 experience could be valued at $36,000 more than someone who had spent 12 years building the department's infrastructure. Evelyn opened the folder and began skimming the first few pages. She remarked that the documentation was extensive. I walked them through the first section, showing them Gerald Fletcher's annual review notes. I pointed to the specific sentences where Gerald praised my work as essential and outstanding, comparing those praises to the tiny salary increases I had received. George leaned forward, examining the numbers. He asked if I had ever requested a promotion or a market adjustment. I showed him the second section of the folder, which contained my written requests and Gerald's repeated claims that the budget was frozen. Then, I directed their attention to the third section of the folder. I told them that we needed to address the proprietary logistics tool, OptiPath, which the company used to manage its shipping routes. I explained that I had developed the software on my own time before joining the company and had registered the copyright under my name. I showed them my official copyright certificate. Evelyn looked puzzled, stating that her records showed the company owned the software through an intellectual property assignment agreement. I pointed to the copy of the assignment agreement in the folder and told them to look closely at the signature. I then showed them the forensic document examiner's report. I explained that I had never signed that agreement and that Gerald had forged my signature to claim credit for the tool. I explained the legal implications under California Penal Code, Section 470. Furthermore, I explained that because the document was forged, it was void ab initio, meaning the company had no legal license to use OptiPath. Under Title 17, Section 501 of the United States Code, the company's commercial use of my copyrighted software constituted willful infringement, exposing them to statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation. George leaned over and examined the handwriting report, comparing the signature on the assignment form with the signatures on my annual reviews. He shook his head slowly, the look of disbelief on his face turning into grave concern. Evelyn asked how long the company had been using this tool. I told her it had been integrated into our core shipping service 4 years ago, meaning every day it ran was another instance of unlicensed use. The room went completely silent. George set his coffee cup down. He looked at Evelyn, then back at the forensic report. Evelyn's professional demeanor did not change, but her eyes narrowed as she read the examiner's conclusions. She asked me if I was certain about the forgery. I told her that the handwriting analyst was a court-certified expert, and that the original code repository logs would prove the tool was created on my personal computer long before the forged agreement was submitted. I added that I wanted to resolve this internal matter without involving external regulatory bodies, but I needed my contributions and my intellectual property to be respected. George sat back in his chair and said they would need to investigate this immediately. He told me that Apex Systems takes compliance and employee equity very seriously, and that they would not tolerate document forgery. He asked if they could keep the folders. I told him the copies were theirs to keep. Evelyn assured me that they would have an answer for me within 24 hours, and thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention. When I returned to my desk, Gerald was waiting for me. He asked me what I had said in the meeting. I looked him in the eye and told him I had shown them the truth about my compensation and the forged signature on the OptiPath agreement. His face went pale, and he looked around to see if anyone was listening. He whispered that I was going to ruin everything we had built. I told him he had ruined it himself, the moment he decided to steal my work and forge my name. He did not say another word for the rest of the day, sitting silently at his desk and staring at his monitor. The next afternoon, Evelyn Brooks sent me an invitation to meet in her office at 3 o'clock. When I arrived, George Albright was also there, sitting on the leather sofa. Evelyn looked at me and asked me to take a seat. She placed a new contract on the table. She told me that the company's internal audit and legal teams had spent the morning reviewing the documents. She confirmed that the signature on the assignment agreement did not match my employment records. And when confronted with the forensic report, Gerald Fletcher had confessed to the forgery. Evelyn said that Apex Systems wanted to correct the situation immediately. She offered me a settlement. The company would adjust my salary to $132,000, effective immediately, representing a market correction for my senior specialist role. They would also pay me a lump sum licensing fee of $85,000 to purchase a legitimate, non-exclusive license for OptiPath, allowing the company to continue using the software legally. Furthermore, she offered me the position of team lead for the logistics department, with an adjusted salary of $145,000. As Gerald was being removed from his position, Evelyn explained that Gerald was being reassigned to basic project support. He would lose all supervisory authority and his direct reports, and his salary would be adjusted downward to $74,000, which was the entry-level rate for project support. The corporate legal team was also conducting a full audit of his past approvals to determine if further legal action was necessary. I read through the contract carefully. The terms were fair, and the licensing fee acknowledged my ownership of the software. I signed the agreement. I told Evelyn that I accepted the team lead position. George stood up and shook my hand, telling me that they were glad to have me leading the team and that they appreciated my professionalism throughout the process. My first week as team lead, I did something Gerald had never done. I requested a complete report of the department's salary structure from HR. I did not do it out of curiosity, but to ensure that my team was being treated fairly. I discovered that two analysts, Nancy Cox and Timothy Webb, were significantly underpaid. Nancy had been with the company for 4 years and was earning $82,000, while Timothy had been there for 3 years and was making $80,000. They were doing excellent work, yet they were being paid far below the industry average simply because they had not complained. I wrote a formal justification memo and submitted it to Evelyn. I requested that Nancy's salary be increased by $10,000 to $92,000, and Timothy's salary be increased by $10,000 to $90,000, bringing both of them in line with their contributions and experience. Evelyn approved the adjustments within 24 hours. I called Nancy into my office to give her the news. When I told her about the $10,000 increase, she stared at me in disbelief. She asked why she was receiving such a large raise, noting that Gerald had always told her there was no budget for salary adjustments. I told her that she was receiving the raise because she earned it, and that under my leadership, the department would prioritize fair compensation over corporate politics. She teared up, thanking me for advocating on her behalf. I then met with Timothy and gave him the same news, and he shook my hand with genuine appreciation, saying it was the first time in 3 years he felt his work was actually seen. He told me that he had been planning to update his resume and start looking for a new job that very weekend, but this change convinced him to stay. Knowing that I had saved the team from losing one of its most talented members made all the struggles worth it. Within a few months, the atmosphere in the department changed completely. The team worked harder and with more enthusiasm, not because I demanded it, but because they knew their efforts were recognized and valued. We established weekly check-ins where everyone could voice their concerns, and I made sure that every project's success was attributed to the actual people who did the work. Gerald Fletcher remained in the department, sitting in a cubicle 2 rows away from my office. He did basic data entry and project support, answering to the senior specialists he used to manage. We rarely spoke, and when we did, it was strictly professional. He eventually resigned 4 months later to take a low-level job at a smaller logistics firm. I still keep the original manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I do not look at it anymore, but I keep it as a reminder of where I started. 12 years of patience and hard work had almost been erased by a manager's greed, but a single meeting changed everything. I did not seek revenge, I sought fairness, and in the end, I learned that loyalty without equity is nothing more than exploitation, and I was finally done being exploited. I shut the drawer, knowing my team was secure and focused on the future. I knew that the department was finally running the way it was meant to, built on respect, honesty, and mutual trust.